The Peacemaker Season 2 finale has come out and it's been very divisive. Just a few weeks ago, people were singing this show's praises, but now they've turned their backs on it because it didn't meet their expectations. But personally, I think this show nailed the multiverse in a way that most comic book, movie, and TV show storylines haven't been able to figure out yet, and people's bad reactions are likely because they wanted spectacle instead of substance, and Peacemaker was always substance first and spectacle later. So I wanted to break down how Peacemaker nailed the multiverse with how they favor character development over spectacle, and how Peacemaker Season 2 finale continued this emphasis on character development and is actually great. But before we get into all that, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I do deep dives on the film and TV industry and break down news and trends, so if you're into any of that, please subscribe. Please bear with me, I'm a little sick right now, but I really wanted to talk about the Peacemaker finale, so thank you so much for watching, but let's get into it. I don't know about you, but when the first trailer for Peacemaker Season 2 came out, I groaned a little bit. The multiverse concept has been done several times before. Marvel has tackled it several times in film and in TV and in animation, and even indie films have tackled it as well. And while there were some great stories that came out of it, there were also some not great ones, and I've also felt like the concept of the multiverse is just kind of played out. But Peacemaker did things in the multiverse just a little bit differently. Instead of fun and spectacle, they focused on character and development. James Gunn mentioned in the Peacemaker podcast that he didn't want to do multiple dimensions, and instead he just wanted to focus on one dimension so that you can focus more on character. And this is what set Peacemaker apart. This show could have very easily had Peacemaker go into multiple different universes, seeing different versions of himself or different versions of characters from the show or the larger DCU. Many others have done a version of this, and while that can be fun, those versions usually take away from story and character and development, where Peacemaker decided to stay in one universe to focus solely on the character of Chris Smith. And here's why that's so important. At the beginning of Peacemaker Season 2, Chris is going through depression and is suicidal, having no direction in life and is focused on all of his mistakes. When you're depressed, you often fantasize about a world where either you didn't exist or a world where all your mistakes were non-existent. And that's exactly what Peacemaker Season 2 does with exploring just one different dimension. After visiting Earth X, Chris constantly talks about how great it is, how he's liked, how his life is better, and how he's in a world without any of his past mistakes. That is exactly what someone who is going through depression does. Only with Peacemaker, they utilize having the multiverse to symbolize his depression. Could you do this with multiple worlds and dimensions? Sure, but it wouldn't hit nearly as hard with him hopping through multiple dimensions. Peacemaker allowed us as an audience and Chris as a character to stew with just one dimension to symbolize his depression. In psychological terms, you could classify this as escapism or maladaptive daydreaming, all things that could happen if someone is depressed or if someone is still suffering from childhood trauma or abuse. Which leads us right to how Peacemaker utilized different characters to further symbolize his depression and build out Chris's psychosis. And this is something that most multiverse stories do not do, and what really sets Peacemaker apart. One of the fun parts of having a multiverse is having different versions of characters you know and love pop up in different ways. And while that can be fun and filled with Easter eggs, Peacemaker used this trope to further expand Chris's character development, as each alternate version of a character further expands and symbolizes Chris's depression. The first alternate character he meets is his father Auggie. Auggie in his world was a wild racist and an insanely abusive dad, and in Earth X, he is not. He truly loves his kids and would do anything for him, and this builds out Chris's depression and trauma. Depressed people often focus on their upbringing, believing that if they were just simply dealt a better hand when they were born, then everything would be alright, or if one thing were different about their upbringing, then everything else would be different as well. And while all that can be true, everyone does have to deal with the hand that they were dealt. That is just life, and Earth X allows Chris to forget that fact. In this world, he was dealt a different hand, and he believes in this one alternate dimension, he can have a life without any of his childhood trauma. With multiple versions of Auggie or multiple dimensions, you could not have this strong of a character beat. The next alternate character that Chris meets is his brother Keith Smith. In Chris's world, he killed him accidentally in a fight when they were kids, haunting him throughout his whole life. But with Keith being alive here, this represents all of Chris's past mistakes going away. When you're depressed, you often harbor on your mistakes, and if you didn't make that one mistake in your life, then everything would be totally different and better, further fantasizing a world that doesn't exist. This is what Keith does for Chris. This was the biggest mistake of his entire life, and it's haunted him ever since. And now in this fantasy world, his mistakes are gone and he can finally be loved for who he truly is, without all of his mistakes. And that connects directly to the finale. But more on that in just a bit. And then of course we have Emilia Harcourt, Chris's love interest, and while I don't believe she symbolizes anything about Chris's depression or mental state, though if you have an idea of how she does, please drop a comment below and let me know, but I think she more symbolizes Chris's ability to ignore red flags. Most of the time that Chris spends with Emilia is in Argus, where it's pointed out by the real Emilia that they all have Nazi flags at their desks. All of them have a copy of Mein Kampf, and there is a massive mural of Hitler that you can't miss. For me, this showcases how much Chris is willingly able to ignore these very obvious red flags just to have a better life. After season 3, fans immediately picked up on the fact that there were no other characters or extras of color in this world, and the real Emilia clocks it instantly. Sure, Chris is pretty dumb, as he does state that he doesn't read books, and Adebayo also states that he is just stupid, but I think this showcases that Chris unconsciously ignored all the obvious red flags in this universe because he is so hurt and depressed. Depressed people do very dumb things, wanting anything to be better with their life, and that's what Emilia symbolizes, at least to me. This is avoidance, denial, motivated denial, whatever you want to call it. And even though Peacemaker does not spend too much time with cameos, they do still have fun with the introduction of the Earth X version of Rick Flag Jr. But even though he is fun, he still represents a part of Chris's mental state. With Keith and Auggie, those characters both showcase his upbringing and how his life could be if it were different. But Rick Flag Jr. reiterates to Chris it's not just mistakes from his childhood or his upbringing that formed him as a man, but also his mistakes that he made not too long ago. Chris could easily think that it's just his upbringing that caused every issue in his life, and without that, everything would be okay because he's grown from it and become better. But the alternate version of Rick Flag Jr. showcases that he's far from just his upbringing. Without his upbringing, would he still have killed Rick Flag Jr.? Possibly not, but this mistake is so far detached from both Auggie and Keith, Chris can't blame Rick's death on them. Chris did it, and that's a mistake that Chris has reckoned with, and this alternate version of Rick is a reminder to him that that mistake still haunts him. In the end, Chris realizes that he is ultimately in control of his life, screaming out that it's his fault, not the world that he's in, but him. And that leads us right into the finale. People thought the finale would be littered with cameos or have a big action set piece and set up the next step in the DCU. But the finale continued the trend of having character first, and the show told us this at every single turn. The entire multiverse could have been all spectacle, having a Nazi Superman with a David Cornsweet cameo, or have a far-right journalist of Lois Lane played by Rachel Brosnahan. And while those could have been fun to see, it wouldn't have really added anything to the story of Chris Smith. In the finale, Chris isolates himself from the world, something depressed people routinely do, thinking the world would be better off without them, constantly avoiding his own friends. And instead of creating a massive action set piece to end the finale with, Peacemaker instead uses the characters all around Chris to help pull him out of his depression. All of his friends overly prove just how much Chris is loved and why they need him, not why the world needs him, but how they need him. Adebayo gives one of the most touching monologues in comic book TV history, and this, along with Emilia finally admitting her love for Chris, it pulls him out of that depression, and that allows him to fully accept who he is. Even though he has had a rough upbringing, even though he has made several mistakes and he cannot escape those mistakes, and there's not some fantasy alternate world where those mistakes do not exist, Chris still found people who loved him for who he really is, mistakes and all. The finale continued many characters' development as well, not just Chris but also Emilia and Adebayo, deciding to move on from their mistakes and start anew with Checkmate. Now I'll agree that some of the characters' developments were just a little too fast. I personally thought Sacha Bordeaux and Langston Fleury should have had just a little bit more time to totally betray Argus. Langston had subtle hints that he wanted to betray them after walking in on Rick Flag beating the shit out of Chris, but Sasha's development felt very fast. I'll totally agree with that criticism, but I won't agree with the criticism that the finale was bad or it wasn't exciting enough, because the show has always been character first, spectacle second. And in a world where most movies and shows pick spectacle, I'm not going to be upset about a show choosing character over everything else. Would I have loved to see more cameos? Sure, that is always fun, but it's not necessary and rarely does it add to the plot. I think Marvel kind of brain rotted us all into thinking every single project should have a ton of cameos, and while that can be used for story and plot, most of the time we can go without them. I think cameos are kind of like junk food. They are great and fun at the time, and you can have one once in a while, but all the time just leads to rot, which I feel like is what happened at Marvel. And we also did get great cameos and a tease for the future of DC as well. In the very first episode, we had Green Lantern and Hawkgirl and Max Lord. We also had the fun alternate version of Rick Flag, and we also had Lex fucking Luthor play an essential part in the plot. We also saw the return of Otis Berg and Sidney Happerson, who are very small characters and not nearly as much fun as, say, Superman, but personally I like how they're building out a universe with these smaller characters. It makes it seem more grounded, and plus, business-wise, it's probably way easier to get them back than an A-list star. And the finale did help set up the future of the DCU, just not in a massive, obvious way. Rick Flag has completely turned evil. He is now working with Lex Luthor. Lex has a way to get back into the public spotlight now. They established Checkmate and Salvation, which I'm sure will have major ramifications, and I'm sure Lanterns is going to handle that in some type of way. Just because they didn't end with a cameo doesn't mean there wasn't a tease of what's to come. Now, I will agree that James Gunn hyping up these past few episodes did cause some of this fan backlash with how he kept stating these last few episodes were crazy. Was he necessarily wrong? No, I don't think so, because James loves these character moments, and fans love teasing the next project like how every single end credit scene for Marvel does. Plus, it is his job to hype up the show and get people excited. Overall, I think Peacemaker will be looked at as smart to utilize just one universe in a multiverse story and not be flooded with cameos with no substance. I'm already seeing people hate on No Way Home and Deadpool and Wolverine because of their over-reliance on nostalgia. I don't agree with that, but I do see the point. Instead of relying on hype and spectacle, Peacemaker stayed true to itself and focused on character. And when the dust settles, I'm sure people will look at Peacemaker Season 2 and its finale as a triumph, and not as a letdown. Were there any other ways that Peacemaker used just one universe to flesh out Chris's character or story? Let me know in the comments below, and please don't forget to like this video, as it does help push it out into the algorithm and find more people like yourself. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so. If you do, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.